here up top. Okay, you got the Jackie Youngs, the Kelsey Mitchells. That's the Louis Vuitton store. We're replacing Kelsey. We're not replacing it with another Louis V item, okay? We're not going quite to the...
There's a conversation happening all across social media, in every comment section and sports talk segment that touches women's basketball right now. And on the surface, it sounds like a simple question. Should the Indiana Fever pay Kelsey Mitchell $1.4 million, or should they let her walk in free agency? That debate is real. That debate absolutely matters. But there's something sitting directly underneath that conversation that almost nobody is publicly discussing right now. And once you see it clearly, the entire picture of this franchise looks completely different. Because this offseason, it is not just Kelsey Mitchell who is asking Indianapolis for maximum money. There is another player in this building, one of the two most important players in the history of this franchise, who has just been handed the legal right to demand a contract worth more than $1 million per year. And if the Indiana Fever are not treating that situation as the absolute highest organizational priority right now, they're already behind before a single free agent contract has even been signed.
Options that we can put together. We can piece together 2 to 3 quality pieces to replace Kelsey Mitchell. She's going to command $1.4 million. I believe the Indiana Fever.
Before we walk through the numbers that are about to reshape everything you think you know about this team, do yourself a favor right now and hit that subscribe button with notifications turned on, because this is exactly the kind of honest breakdown you need in your feed as the most consequential free agency window in WNBA history opens in just days. No manufactured outrage here. No hot takes designed to get a reaction. Just the numbers, the context, and the truth about what is actually happening inside this organization. Now, let us get into it. For the better part of a decade, WNBA roster construction was a relatively straightforward exercise. The salary cap was so compressed that the difference between a maximum player and a minimum player barely registered in real financial terms. Teams were not making complex decisions about capital allocation because there was not enough capital to make any decision truly complex. Players took pay cuts just to stay home and play domestically. Coaches built rosters on loyalty and relationships because the money simply could not speak for itself. That era is completely and permanently over. The new collective bargaining agreement has detonated the old financial model from the inside out. The salary cap in 2026 reaches $7 million. That is a nearly 400% increase from the $1.5 million cap that every team in this league operated under just one season ago. The Supermax contract, the highest individual salary available anywhere in the league, has jumped from $249,000 all the way to $1.4 million. The average player salary has gone from roughly $66,000 per season to approximately $600,000.
It's gonna be about half of that based on this, so you could get a Bridget Carlton from in the $600K range, okay? You could probably get Bridget Carlton for the $550, $600K. You probably can land a Bridget Carlton, and she's...
And the minimum salary for a veteran player with experience now sits somewhere between $270,000 and $300,000, depending on years of service. These are not incremental changes. This is a complete architectural reinvention of professional women's basketball. And every single general manager in this league is navigating that new reality without a map, without a historical model, and without any established best practice to follow. There is no precedent for what a $7 million WNBA roster should look like. There is no proven formula for how to allocate this new money across 12 roster spots, while simultaneously planning for the future contract escalations that are already baked into the agreement for coming years. That makes the decisions every front office makes in the next several weeks not just important for the upcoming season. They are franchise-defining choices that will either position these organizations for sustained success or create financial traps that compound in severity with every passing year. For the Indiana Fever, the stakes are higher than anywhere else in the entire league, not just in the Caitlin Clark era, in the entire history of this franchise.
Atkins and a Bridget Carlton, or a Bridget Carlton, Ray Burrell, and a Timmy Fag-Benley, 3 for the price of 1 of Kelsey Mitchell. I think you have to look at these things, and I believe it's a move that the Indiana Fever need to look to.
And what happens to their roster this offseason will either give Caitlin Clark the infrastructure she needs to compete for a championship or quietly guarantee that her prime athletic years are spent carrying a roster that perpetually falls one decisive step short. The Mitchell debate on the surface. Let's start with the most visible piece of this puzzle, Kelsey Mitchell. 8 years in Indianapolis, multiple all-star appearances, one of the most explosive scoring guards in the entire history of this league, and coming off a 2025 season where she was genuinely the best player on a Fever roster battered by injuries. Mitchell stepped forward when the team needed her most, finished 5th in MVP voting, averaged close to 20 points per game, and delivered what was one of the best individual campaigns of her entire career. The Fever came within one game of the WNBA Finals largely because of her consistency in high-pressure moments. When Fever general manager Amber Cox publicly stated that re-signing Kelsey Mitchell was the organization's #1 priority this offseason, it was not a surprising statement. This is a franchise icon, a player who stayed in Indianapolis through years of losing, who watched the organization go through multiple rebuilds, and who is still standing when everything finally started to turn around. She is beloved by the fan base in the kind of deep personal way that very few professional athletes ever achieve in any city. The surface case for bringing her back is genuinely strong. She is proven. She is productive. She knows the coaching staff, the system, the city, and her teammates better than any outside free agent ever could. And under the new CBA, the Fever have the option to designate Mitchell as a core player, giving them the exclusive right to match any outside offer and lock her in before she can negotiate with competing teams. On that surface level, the argument writes itself. She is your best returning scorer. She is your most experienced veteran. She is your connection between the old Fever and the new one. Of course you bring her back, but underneath that surface conversation, there are two financial realities that make this decision far more complicated and far more dangerous than the fan base currently understands. And the more urgent of the two has almost nothing to do with Kelsey Mitchell herself. The Aaliyah Boston revelation nobody is discussing. This is where the entire conversation changes. Aaliyah Boston is the foundational interior piece of everything the Indiana Fever are trying to build around Caitlin Clark. The 6'5" post player from South Carolina is one of the most complete players in the entire WNBA. She defends multiple positions with consistency. She finishes at the rim at an elite rate. She is a first-team All-WNBA selection who, at 24 years old, is still actively developing and getting meaningfully better in ways that show up every time you watch her play. She is also currently on a rookie contract under the old collective bargaining agreement. That fact would have protected the Indiana Fever financially for several more years. A rookie deal kept Boston locked into below-market money, regardless of how she performed or what her true market value was. That was the trade-off embedded in every rookie contract in the old system. Players earned opportunity and roster security. Teams kept financial flexibility. That protection no longer exists. The new CBA includes a provision called the EPIC Clause, which stand for exceptional performance on initial contract. Under this specific rule, any player on a rookie deal who earned a first-team All-WNBA selection becomes immediately eligible for maximum salary. Aaliyah Boston qualifies. Right now, today, before a single dollar of free agent money has been committed, Aaliyah Boston has the legal right to walk into the Indiana Fever front office and demand a contract worth more than $1 million per year. And she would be completely justified in doing exactly that. First team All-WNBA, 24 years old, still improving, on a team with a generational point guard that makes every player around her statistically better. Aaliyah Boston is worth every cent of a maximum contract. But here's the problem that emerges when you stack that reality on top of everything else. Add Boston at over $1 million. Add Caitlin Clark at approximately $530,000 under her revised rookie scale, which jumped dramatically from the $78,000 she was earning under the old agreement. Add Michaela Timpson at roughly the minimum rookie scale. And before Indiana has placed a single call to a free agent or their representation, nearly $2 million of the $7 million cap is already spoken for by the only 3 players currently confirmed to be on this roster. $2 million gone, $5 million remaining, and the entire offseason still to navigate. Now, put Kelsey Mitchell at $1.4 million on top of that. $3.2 million for players. $3.8 million left for 8 more roster spots. A 52-game schedule, and any mid-season flexibility the organization hopes to maintain. That is the real financial picture the Indiana Fever are operating inside of right now. The real salary math. Let us follow these numbers all the way to where they actually lead, because the arithmetic here tells a story that every Indiana fan needs to sit with seriously. $7 million total cap. Clark at $530,000. Boston at over $1 million. Timpson at the rookie minimum. 3 players committed, roughly $1.8 million consumed. 26% of the total team budget already allocated before the market opens. Add Mitchell at $1.4 million. For players, $3.2 million. $3.8 million left for 8 roster spots. On paper, that still sounds workable, but let us actually fill those spots and see where the numbers take us. Sophie Cunningham is coming off a season where she demonstrated legitimate starting caliber production before a knee injury cut everything short. She is a 6'1" two-way wing who will attract real offers from multiple franchises in this new salary environment. Fair market value for a player of her profile is somewhere between $500,000 and $750,000. Lexi Hull, a 4-year Fever veteran and one of the most underrated defensive guards in the Eastern Conference, is in a similar range. Commit fair money to both of them, and you have spent another $1 million to $1.5 million. $2.3 to $2.8 million remaining for 6 more players. At the new minimum salary floor of $270,000 to $300,000 per veteran contract, filling 6 more spots at absolute minimum cost requires between $1.6 and $1.8 million. You are operating with essentially zero financial cushion. No room for an upgrade at mid-season. No leverage in negotiations because every competing team knows your cap situation the moment they read the public filings. And no ability to absorb a single unexpected injury without immediately compromising the competitive integrity of the roster. Championship rosters require breathing room. They require the financial flexibility to address problems as they arise across a long, physically demanding schedule. A 52-game season is something this league has never experienced before. The teams that succeed in this new era will not be the ones that spent every available dollar on 4 familiar names and crossed their fingers that nothing went wrong. They will be the teams that built genuine depth and maintained the organizational ability to adapt. Sign Mitchell at the Supermax under these specific conditions, and you're not just spending $1.4 million on shooting guard. You are making a decision that compromises every other personnel move the franchise will attempt to make for the entire season. The quiet losses that could hurt the most. There's a version of this offseason that looks completely fine on the surface. Kelsey Mitchell signs her contract. The fan base celebrates. The narrative is positive and the social media reaction is warm. And then, quietly over the following weeks, the 2 players who gave this roster its competitive identity on the defensive end signed contract somewhere else. Sophie Cunningham averaged 8.6 points, 3.5 rebounds, 1.0 steals, and 1.7 three-pointers per game in 2025. She accomplished all of that in just 25 minutes per night, which means her per-minute impact was even more significant than those numbers directly suggest. She plays with physical intensity and competitive aggression that raises the temperature of every game she participates in. She was just beginning to develop genuine chemistry alongside Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston when a knee injury ended her season without warning. She will be paid this offseason. The only question is who pays her. Lexi Hull is facing the same situation. Selected 6th overall in the 2022 draft, 4 complete seasons in a Fever uniform. A perimeter defender with the size, lateral quickness, and basketball intelligence to guard multiple positions and consistently disrupt opposing offenses in ways that show up clearly in film but rarely dominate a box score. Hull is exactly the type of player that sophisticated front offices recognize as genuinely elite before the general public realizes she was ever available to lose. Here is the part of this equation that matters most. The Indiana Fever can only apply the core designation to one player. That designation goes to Kelsey Mitchell. Sophie Cunningham heads into unrestricted free agency without any protective mechanism, without cap space to offer her a genuinely competitive contract. She takes her value to a team that can pay her properly. And Lexi Hull faces precisely the same financial squeeze coming from precisely the same direction. You can pay Kelsey Mitchell $1.4 million. Or you can retain the defensive foundation that made last year's playoff run possible. Based on the current cap math, doing both simultaneously is not a realistic scenario. In a roster that loses both Cunningham and Hull while adding Mitchell at maximum money is not a better team than last year. It is a more expensive, less balanced, and more defensively vulnerable version of the same team, with less depth and less flexibility to fix problems as they emerge. What Caitlin Clark actually needs around her. Let us ask the question that should be the absolute foundation of every single personnel decision this front office makes. Not what the fan base wants emotionally. Not what generates the most positive social media sentiment. What does Caitlin Clark's specific style of basketball actually require in order to operate at its true ceiling? Clark's offensive profile is genuinely unlike anything the WNBA has seen before. Her shooting range extends to distances that force opposing defenses to make impossible choices, committing defensive resources to contest shots from locations that simply did not exist as threats in this league before she arrived. Her passing vision in transition, threading full-court passes to teammates running at full speed, is a weapon that most defensive schemes in professional women's basketball are simply not built to stop. And the gravitational effect she creates on the entire floor, the way opposing defenses must permanently reallocate attention and positioning just because she is standing somewhere, generates opportunities for every other player on the court that would not exist without her presence. But none of those advantages operate independently. Every single one of them depends on what the other four players around her are doing on every possession. Clark's offense works because of pace and spacing and the willingness of every other player on the floor to move without the ball and be ready to convert the opportunities her gravity creates. When the floor is properly stretched and players are actively moving and cutting, her gravity does the majority of the offensive work before a pass is even thrown. Kelsey Mitchell is a legitimate star. Her value in a traditional offensive system is real and significant, but her primary offensive tool is isolating on the perimeter and creating her own shot against individual coverage. That is what she does best. That is what drove her to 20 points per game last season. And in a traditional WNBA half-court offense, those skills are enormously valuable. In a Caitlin Clark offense specifically designed around pace, movement, and gravitational spacing, they create a structural tension that no amount of talent on either side can fully resolve. When Mitchell needs to isolate and hunt her own shot, possessions slow down. When possessions slow down, Clark's primary advantages diminish. The engine that powers Indiana's offense runs on a very specific kind of fuel, and isolation basketball is not that fuel. The players who make Caitlin Clark genuinely better are the ones who catch and shoot without hesitation, who sprint the secondary break without being told, who play 40 feet of defense and get back in transition, so that the offensive opportunities Clark generates at one end are not canceled out by defensive breakdowns at the other. Those players exist in this free agent market right now. Multiple legitimate options are available at price points that allow the Fever to construct a starting five and a real rotation around their franchise player, without compromising the financial infrastructure of the entire organization to do it. The free agent market and the expansion threat. Here is the genuinely encouraging part of this conversation. The 2026 WNBA free agent class is historically deep, and it is deep in ways that specifically benefit a franchise like Indiana if they approach it with discipline and genuine strategic clarity. The top of the market carries enormous names. Nafisa Collier, Breanna Stewart, Jackie Young. These are max or near max caliber players who will command the absolute ceiling of what the new salary structure allows and who are unlikely to land in Indianapolis in any realistic financial scenario. But the middle tier of this free agent class, the range from roughly $500,000 to $800,000, is filled with proven, legitimate basketball players who fit specific tactical profiles and who will make every team they join meaningfully better. Players who spent the previous CBA era going overseas because $66,000 in the WNBA was simply not a competitive proposition are now staying domestic or returning to the American game because $600,000 in Indianapolis or Chicago or Atlanta is a fundamentally different life than it was 2 years ago. The talent pool available to smart front offices this specific offseason is wider and deeper than anything this league has ever seen at one time. But here is the urgency that cannot be understated. The Portland Fire and the Toronto Tempo, the two brand new expansion franchises entering their inaugural WNBA seasons in 2026, are arriving at this free agency period with significant cap flexibility, no existing roster commitments, and absolutely nothing to lose from being aggressively generous with their opening offers. Their expansion draft is scheduled for April 3rd, and immediately after that date, both organizations will be writing checks to every available middle market free agent they can identify. These are not passive competitors. They are franchises specifically designed to be disruptive in exactly this kind of environment. They can offer multi-year contracts with signing bonuses and starting roles and the promise of being a cornerstone piece of something brand new. For a player who spent 4 years rotating off the bench for an established contender, that pitch is genuinely compelling. And the Fever, consumed by the Mitchell conversation and the Boston contract situation, cannot afford to be slow or disorganized when a market opens. The general managers who dominate this free agency period will be the ones who already know exactly who they want, have already established real relationships with those players and their agents, and are ready to act decisively the moment the clock starts. Any hesitation, any delay caused by unresolved internal debates about familiar roster faces will cost Indiana the exact free agent targets that could transform this roster into a genuine championship contender. The championship clock has a closing date. There is one final piece of this conversation that the Indiana Fever front office cannot afford to ignore, even though it is the most uncomfortable one to discuss publicly. Caitlin Clark is 24 years old. Aaliyah Boston is 24 years old. This specific combination of generational offensive creativity and elite interior presence, both players in the early peak of their athletic careers, on the same roster at the same time, is something that does not occur every decade in professional basketball. This is a genuine, legitimate, time-limited championship window that the organization has a deep obligation to maximize with every single decision it makes. But that window has a closing date, and that date is closer than the fan base wants to acknowledge. Clark becomes eligible for a maximum contract worth approximately $1.3 million as early as 2027, when that extension gets signed. And it will get signed because no organization in this league is allowing Caitlin Clark to reach unrestricted free agency. The salary math changes dramatically. Clark at $1.3 million in Boston, at over $1 million in Mitchell, if she is still on the roster, at whatever her next contract looks like. The cap space available for depth and complementary pieces shrinks to a level that makes roster construction genuinely difficult. The window to build a properly structured, deeply talented championship roster around both Clark and Boston is at its widest right now in 2026. While Clark is still operating on her below-market rookie scale. Every dollar that gets committed inefficiently this offseason, every contract that prioritizes emotional familiarity over tactical fit and financial flexibility creates a structural problem that compounds in severity as the overall salary cap continues to grow and the cost of legitimate championship caliber talent rises with. The New York Liberty watched Indiana come within one game of the finals last year, and they're rebuilding with that specific threat in mind. The Connecticut Sun, the Las Vegas Aces, every serious contender in this league has spent the offseason studying what the Fever do well and designing ways to neutralize it. They're not standing still. And the expansion franchises in Portland and Toronto are constructing rosters from scratch with a 5-year plan and the cap flexibility to execute it aggressively. The margin for error inside the Indiana Fever organization has never been smaller. Every personnel decision made between now and the opening of free agency carries consequences that extend well beyond a single season. And there is simply no version of this story where financial recklessness in the 2026 offseason does not create a meaningful competitive disadvantage at some point in the next 3 years. 3 paths, and what each one actually means. Let's be completely direct about where this is all heading. There are 3 realistic paths forward for the Indiana Fever, and each one produces a fundamentally different version of this franchise. Path 1. The Fever signed Kelsey Mitchell to the full Supermax at $1.4 million. The fan base celebrates. The emotional continuity narrative wins. The social media response is positive and warm. And then, over the following months, the financial consequences arrive quietly and systematically. Sophie Cunningham receives a below-market offer that she declines, taking her value to a franchise that can compensate her fairly. Lexi Hull faces the same calculation and arrives at the same conclusion. The remaining cap space forces the front office into a series of compromises on every remaining roster spot, building a team that looks respectable at the top and gets progressively thinner and more vulnerable every spot below it. By game 38 of 52, fatigue and injuries have exposed the depth problem that was baked into the roster from day one. The team remains competitive. They may even win a playoff series. But the ceiling of this group, the genuine championship ceiling that Caitlin Clark deserves to compete for, is quietly lower than it needed to be. Path 2. The Fever used the core designation on Mitchell, but negotiate a 1-year deal rather than a multi-year Supermax commitment. This is the most cautious version of the strategy. Mitchell stays in a Fever uniform for 2026. The offense maintains its continuity. The fan base remains engaged. The front office buys itself one more full season to evaluate how the new salary landscape stabilizes before making any long-term financial commitment. The risk embedded in this path is straightforward. Mitchell is a proven all-star in the peak of her career, and the open market in this new economy will offer her multi-year security from multiple franchises who would genuinely love to add her scoring. She has leverage she did not have 2 years ago, and she absolutely knows it. A 1-year qualifying offer may not be enough to keep her in Indianapolis if a competitor is willing to give her the long-term certainty she has earned. Path 3. The Fever make the genuinely difficult and genuinely unpopular decision to let Mitchell test the open market without matching a Supermax offer. They take that $1.4 million and deploy it strategically across multiple free agent additions, specifically designed around what Caitlin Clark needs tactically and what this roster needs structurally to compete across 52 games at full competitive intensity. They bring back Sophie Cunningham at fair market value. They retain Lexi Hull. They add one targeted outside piece that fits the specific offensive and defensive profile the coaching staff has identified as the priority. And they enter the 2026 season with more depth, more tactical flexibility, better defensive coverage across the rotation, and a financial structure that allows them to remain competitive and adaptable through an entire season and into the playoffs. The fan base reaction in February and March will not be positive. That is the honest truth. Letting a beloved 8-year veteran walk in free agency to a competing franchise never generates celebration in the short term. But the teams that win championships consistently do not make roster decisions based on short-term social media sentiment. They make them based on the numbers, the tactical reality, and the long-term financial picture that will either sustain or strangle the franchise in the years ahead. The math has a very clear opinion about which path gives Caitlin Clark the best genuine shot at a championship before her own contract fundamentally changes the financial equation. And the front office inside the Indiana Fever organization knows exactly what those numbers say. The only question is whether they have the organizational courage to follow them. The decision is coming. The Indiana Fever are standing at the most consequential crossroads in the history of this franchise. Not just in the Caitlin Clark era, in the entire story of this organization. The Kelsey Mitchell decision is real and it matters enormously. But it is only half of the picture. The Aaliyah Boston contract situation, the Sophie Cunningham and Lexi Hull free agency clock, the expansion teams moving aggressively on the exact same middle market free agents Indiana needs, The championship window that is widest right now, before Clark's own contract changes the math forever. These are not separate conversations. They're all the same conversation happening simultaneously inside one organization under enormous pressure. The window is genuinely open right now. The talent is there. The coaching structure is in place. The franchise player is healthy, motivated, and 24 years old. Everything required to build a legitimate championship roster is available if the front office approaches this offseason with the clarity and courage that the moment demands. But one financially reckless decision, one moment of choosing emotional familiarity over tactical precision and long-term financial intelligence, can quietly remove options that do not come back. In a $7 million world with expansion teams hunting the same assets and every contender in the East rebuilding with Indiana specifically in mind, the organizations that make smart decisions right now are the ones that are still competing for championships in 2028 and 2029. The organizations that make comfortable decisions right now will be watching from the outside, wondering exactly where the window closed. So I want to know what you actually think. Can the Indiana Fever front office find the genuine courage to follow the numbers? Or does emotional loyalty to a franchise icon override the financial reality of the most important offseason in Fever history? Drop your full take in the comments below. There are no wrong answers here, but there are honest ones, and I genuinely want to read yours. If this breakdown gave you something real to think about, smash that like button right now, because it directly helps this content reach more people who care about women's basketball at this level. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on, because free agency opens in days, and every single move this franchise makes is going to matter. The most important weeks in Indiana Fever history are happening right now. Do not look away for a second.